I'm in dire need to go back to 1949. I will gratefully accept any suggestions, any help. This little advertisement was published in an American magazine in March 1972. The reader may think it naive of me to attach any significance to this hoax or to the ravings of a madman. This film is proof of the presence among us of the secret masters of time, who travel in it at will. At the same time, we will make sure that the concept of traveling in time appeared long before science fiction. At the end of the film, we will try to analyze and solve all the time paradoxes that science fiction often uses. In other words, it will not be about science fiction among the scientists who discussed the possibility of time travel even into the past. Let us name the Swiss logician Gödel, who created a model of the universe in which such travel is possible, the English astrophysicist Bonner, the French mathematician Jacques Merleau-Ponty, a cousin of the philosopher, who in his book on modern cosmogonies provides calculations that allow proving the possibility of physical travel into the past. Chaplin Women. In October 2010, Northern Irish filmmaker George Clarke uploaded a video clip entitled Chaplin's Time Traveler to YouTube. The clip analyzes bonus material in a DVD of the Charlie Chaplin film The Circus. Included in the DVD is footage from the film's Los Angeles premiere at Grauman's Chinese Theater in 1928. At one point, a woman is seen walking by, holding up an object to her ear. Clarke said that, on closer examination, she was talking into a thin, black device that had appeared to be a phone. Clarke concluded that the woman was possibly a time traveler. The clip received millions of hits and was the subject of televised news stories. Nicholas Jackson, associate editor for The Atlantic, says the most likely answer is that she was using a portable hearing aid, a technology that was just being developed at the time. Philip Skroska, an archivist at the Bernard Becker Medical Library of Washington University School of Medicine, thought that the woman might have been holding a rectangular ear trumpet. New York Daily News writer Michael Sheridan said the device was probably an early hearing aid, perhaps an acousticon manufactured by Miller Reese Hutchison. Time traveler in New York. On an average June day in 1950, the Big Apple may have gotten a strange surprise which could change the way we think of time. In the middle of Times Square, a man in clothes, which looked several decades out of fashion, simply appeared in front of a number of spectators. Those who saw him said he looked like someone filled with dread, though it creepy one was a fleeting look as he tried to run off and was hit and killed by a vehicle. The NYPD assigned this strange case to Captain Hubert Rim of Missing Persons, who began an investigation to track down who this strange man who mysteriously materialized was. The officer searched through his belongings and found a 5-cent copper beer token for a bar nobody in the area had heard of, $70 in old banknotes, a bill for horse care at a stable which no longer existed on Lexington Avenue, a letter dated for June 1876, a third-place medal for a 3-legged race, and the man's business card which identified him as Rudolph Fentz. Rim and the other investigators wondered how the objects in the dead man's possessions could be so old yet show no sign of wear or aging. The police captain went out in search of who this Rudolph Fentz was, and the closest he came was the locating of a Rudolph Fent Jr. who once lived in New York but had moved to Florida some years before. He reached out to Fentz Jr. and discovered he had passed away a few years before. Though his widow gave Rim the shock of his life when the officer asked about the Rudolph Fentz at the center of his investigation. She revealed that when her husband was a boy in the 1876, his father went out for an evening stroll and never came back. Sure enough, when Rim found the missing person file on the man, it matched his Rudolph Fentz perfectly. Could Fentz's innocent stroll ended with a time slip 74 years into the future? The device from Antikythera. Much has already been written about it, but it is worthwhile to tell again about this device in more detail. In 1900, pearl fishermen from Dodecanese made a dive in a place where they had never dived before because of storms. At a depth of 70 meters they found a shipwreck, from which they raised marble and bronze statues, as well as a certain object. In 1955, Professor Price wrote of it, "Nothing resembling this device is or has been found elsewhere. Nothing like it has been mentioned in either scientific or fiction literature. Just like the Boskop skull, this device from Antikythera is unique. What is it? It is a complex combination of cams and gears that could not have been assembled without the use of complex mechanisms, particularly the dividing mechanism. However, in 82 BC, when the ship wrecked, machines of this kind obviously did not exist. Inscriptions made on the device speak of the movement of the planets, the sun, and the moon. The inscriptions are numerous, and it has been suggested that this is an astrological device. We will propose another hypothesis. With the help of this object from Antikythera and some simple observations, it is possible to accurately establish the date. Consequently, this device could be of value to someone who is traveling through time and who needed to establish the time in which he is, the day and the year. The foundation of the civilization of time, the solution to the mystery of time, was burned on July 12, 1562, in Mexico City. Diego de Landa, a Franciscan friar who had been commissioned to suppress heresy in the provinces of Yucatan and Guatemala, shortly before conquered by His Eminence Spain, sentenced to the stake the most important of the Mayan manuscripts, which spoke of the mysteries of time. Witnesses said that at first the fire refused to consume it. For several minutes it seemed that the crowd of Indians gathered around the place of execution was about to prevent it. Then the soldiers prepared to fire, the Indians retreated, and the fire was engaged. Since then, several traces of the Mayan civilization have been found, and modern research, particularly that of Soviet scientists, has been able to shed some light on it. But the most important of the mysteries of time has disappeared. We only know that the Maya did not consider time to be homogeneous. In their view, some of the parts of time had certain properties, and others did not. The Maya believed that time had not two vectors, past and future, but six. We encounter here again the branches of time that will help us resolve the temporal paradoxes of time travel. There are few sources at our disposal that can help us recover the secrets of the Maya. There are only 3 manuscripts. The first of these, looking more like a fan than a book as we understand it, has 74 pages and is in Dresden. The other is at Madrid. It has 112 pages, but the beginning and end are conspicuously absent. Finally, 24 more pages in a deplorable condition were discovered by Léon de Rosny in the archives of the Bibliothèque Nationale de Paris. The zero date of chronology marks the time when man appeared on Earth. One inscription from 3113 BC states that this date falls in the year 5041, 738, which roughly coincides with the most recent anthropological research. For a long time it was believed that the Maya set dates arbitrarily, but even official scholars are now coming to the conclusion that the Maya were in possession of timekeeping. This part contains, first, a list of 80 solar eclipses that could be observed all over the Earth during the first millennium BC. Second, it contains predictions of eclipses that were to occur in the year 42 and in the year 886. These predictions are accurate and have been confirmed factually. This could mean either that the Maya used telescopes and they didn't have telescopes, or that they had mastery of sophisticated mathematical operations, which is not very likely to be true. Or they were able to subdue time by direct study and observation, which seems to be a specific feature of their civilization. Such mastery of time is described in the sacred book of Shirlambalaam, which predicts in detail the arrival of the Spanish in the Americas 10 centuries before the event itself. Who were the Mayans? They came from the north at an unknown time. In their language, north and past are denoted by the same word. According to recent research, they lived before the Olmecs, at least 10,000 years before Christ. And maybe even earlier. It is not known why by the 10th century AD the Maya had abandoned their cities. Some of these cities have been discovered among the jungle, others have yet to be found. Aerial photography, as well as photography from satellites, allowed to find tens of thousands of unexplored, so far unexplored pyramids on Yucatan and in Guatemala. Discovered and partially explored cities put us in front of mysteries. Like, for example, the city of Palenque. In this city was found a lunar calendar, according to which the length of one lunar month corresponds to 29, 53,059 days. Fantastic accuracy. The most recent numerical data obtained with atomic clocks differ from this number by only 0.00027 days. And after all, This result was obtained by people who had neither a telescope nor a computer. After that, it is hard to argue that the dates obtained by such a numerical system are fictitious or presumptive. In Palenque, on top of one of the huge pyramids, there is a temple of inscriptions. One of these inscriptions looks remarkably like a dashboard. Of course, with different dials and buttons. In this dashboard, by all means decide to see the dashboard of an aircraft. Some of the inscriptions of the same time speak of 9 underworlds. One of them is ruled by the god Kun Ahab, who, as one of the inscriptions says, is also the ruler of the planet Venus. It seems that the Maya numerical system has been sufficiently deciphered. The Maya used the number 0, depicting it in their calculations as a flying machine with portholes. Their calendar is made on the system of numbering, having in the basis of the number 20. According to this calendar, the same date could not be repeated until 52 years later. The year began on December 23rd, the day of the winter solstice, and included the following months: new sun, wells, sowing, white, deer, fire growth. Yellow sun, drum, big rain, thunderstorm noise, unknown god, frogs, god of hunting, bat, unknown god. Last month, based on the average length of the day, the Maya could see very large periods of time, up to 64,000 years ago. And if the text specifies that one cannot go back further than 5041, 738 years, this is no doubt because one cannot study time before the advent of humans. Time differs in color, each month has its own color. The same number of a month, repeated in 52 years, will necessarily be of a different color. There are good and bad colors of time. And being in the flow of time and studying it, one sees not only the past and the future, but also the other 4 directions. Discovered in 1942, the last of the Maya books found, the Sherlam Balam contains prophecies and historical accounts set forth in epic form. It would be a great mistake to think of it as something between the Iliad and the Bible. The Maya people are alive and, what is more, their population is growing. It is fortunate that the Maya survived, for between 1519 and 1605 the Spanish exterminated more than 23 million people. The survivors knew many secrets, which they kept hidden for fear of Spanish reprisals. Gradually, Mayan written documents come out of the vaults. Little by little the location of the cities is revealed. One day all the secrets will be revealed. Until now, the richest in discoveries has been the city of Montauk. There is a magnificent temple there with 3 huge rooms covered with frescoes that have told us much, and from which we await new discoveries. Bonampak means walls covered with paintings in the Mayan language. The city is relatively young, dating back to 800 AD. It's unfinished. The same reasons the Maya abandoned their cities caused them to interrupt the construction of this city. In the frescoes of Bonampak, we see Mayan crowds, the war that was raging at the time, and symbols of the times. The city was discovered by accident in 1946. The giant frescoes of this city are believed to be the combined efforts of many craftsmen working under the direction of one brilliant man. It's a bit reminiscent of the way workshops worked during the Renaissance. This unknown genius apparently drew the frescoes himself in black ink, leaving his assistants to finish them in various colors. The construction of Bonampak seems to have been begun during that devastating period of time when other cities were abandoned by their inhabitants, and then continued during the invasion of Quetzalcoatl, who came from the north, destroying the first Maya civilization in the name of the serpent in his plumage and creating another. It seems that both of these phenomena were known in advance. It is asked, then, why start the construction of the city, if it is known in advance that it is not destined to be completed? Here we once again return to the question of fatalism and the meaning of predictions. Note that in Bonampak, as in other cities, frescoes were destroyed, statues were smashed. Steels were overturned, and their tops were buried deep underground. Clearly, the inhabitants did not want the conquerors who would enter the city after they left to learn their secrets. The Sherlam Balam books strongly suggest that Mayan priests predicted not only enemy invasions, but also natural disasters such as cyclones and tsunamis. These predictions were regarded as something inevitable and could in no way alter an inescapable fate. In 1965, two twins in their 20s were discovered in New York City with severely damaged brain functions. Their intelligence quotient was 50, but with one extraordinary ability: absolute mastery of the arithmetic of time. When one of them was asked, what day of the week was February 4th, 1648, the other immediately answered, Friday. And when the other was asked what day it would be on February 11th, 2003, the first answered, Wednesday. The tests showed that they were never wrong. This unusual ability must have been caused by some anomaly in the twins' brains. We know that Mayan priests performed brain surgery on other priests. Trepanation instruments and trepanized skulls have been found. Because of this, I can imagine that Mayan priests knew how to perform brain surgery that resulted in the patient gaining power over time. Perhaps some priests who were given highly successful surgeries could even travel through time. Alas, the material provided by the written documents is too vague and too few in number for us to be certain of this. Thus, such mastery of time provided not only knowledge of the past and of the future, but, in addition, individual knowledge of the structure of time. This phenomenon seems to be unique in the history of mankind. This was the great secret that Friar Diego de Landa destroyed, and those who possess this secret to this day jealously guard it. In the early 20th century, another Mayan manuscript, the fourth, was discovered in a large clay jug in the Yucatan, about which nothing was previously known. But before it could be copied or photographed, some unknown people managed to burn it. It seems that the Mayan priests gave precise instructions at the time of the invasions, and that these instructions have been followed to this day. No doubt much was destroyed by the Spaniards. And the smallpox epidemic that followed their invasion killed even more Maya than the Spaniards. But not everything was destroyed. Already by the time the Spaniards arrived, which had been known long before, precautions had been taken. Thus, the temple, located at the top of the pyramid Uxmal, could only be accessed by a single staircase, the steps of which were a man's height. To climb it, one had to have special training, which only priests had. At the very top of the stairs is a stone face, not resembling a human face, which stares fiercely at all who approach. Nearby are huge vases that were meant for the sacrificial fire. Diego de Landa burned all the documents he found in the temples atop the pyramids. But there are other pyramids and even whole cities that we don't know anything about yet. And there are also documents hidden in underground galleries. Let's hope that one day they will find a document that will allow us to find out what kind of operation that gives the ability to own time. Assuming that such an operation exists, the next question arises: how could the Mayan priests perform an operation that we are unable to do? All of our anatomical methods of examining the brain, the study of the brain with radioisotopes, all of our electroencephalograms, all of these would not have been able to help us perform this operation. So how did the Maya, barely out of the Neolithic era, make this discovery? The only possible hypothesis is that they did not discover it, but it was discovered by them. By whom? By the secret masters of time, who move and act in it. This is as admissible a hypothesis as the hypothesis of unearthly beings, which, by the way, it does not exclude. The man from Boskop. Boskop is an African village in the Potchefstroom district, located in the Transvaal. In 1913, a skeleton and skull were found there that did not belong to any known human race. The size of the skull corresponds to 1,600 cubic centimeters, which is considerably larger than most modern European races. No known race possesses such skull sizes. It is possible that a skull of this size may appear in the future, as recognized by anthropologists. Then, if the Boskopian race did not exist before, we can assume that a man who appeared from the future, traveling through time, found his death in Africa. Remember Pearl Harbor? One of the most amazing, in my opinion, is a case that took place in the small American town of Owensville, Indiana. In December 1939, on the sidewalks were found words written in huge letters, "Remember Pearl Harbor." However, the Japanese bombing of Pearl Harbor did not happen until 2 years afterward, exactly to the day. It is difficult to find any rational hypothesis that can explain this phenomenon. Another interesting testimony, because here the picture from the past moves into the present and stays there. Nero's mug. Emperor Nero was given a mug made of a plastic material. This mug would not break when dropped, but would bend and deform. Then it could be straightened with a hammer. The man who gave him the mug was ordered by Nero to be executed so as not to ruin the Roman glassblowers. This story is usually explained by the fact that one of the Roman craftsmen found the secret of flexible glass. Physical and chemical conditions, however, imply that such glass is impossible. Glass is a solidified liquid that can only become liquid again at ultra-high temperatures. On the other hand, it seems almost implausible that a Roman artisan could have discovered an industry of plastic materials. In particular, the use of molds made of special steel that required steam or electricity to achieve the high pressures necessary to deform plastic materials. Nero's plastic mug could not have been made in his time. It is not from there, and the hypothesis of its penetration from time fits just fine. Nero's mug has not been found, but 24 electric batteries were found in Baghdad during the first excavations in 1938. It is hard to believe that these items themselves came from the future, but the information and technological knowledge necessary for their manufacture could not have belonged to the civilization of that era. These items were indeed made between the 2nd century BC and the 6th century AD. Immortal Emperor Fuxi. The immortal Chinese Emperor Fuxi does not have exact dates of life. It belongs to the kingdom of Xia. The eminent Chinese historian Joseph Needham initially argued that the Xia kingdom was fictitious, and then that it dates back to approximately the 2nd millennium BC. It would also be problematic to accept as a basis the Chinese chronicles, which say that Fuxi was born of a virgin, but in this case without divine participation. This maiden, while bathing, found a flower on her clothes and ate it. And later she gave birth to the Master of Time. According to Chinese legends, the date of his birth is usually attributed to the period between 50,000 and 3000 BC. According to some legends, Fuxi appeared from the sky accompanied by unearthly creatures with elephant trunks, and these creatures left bas-reliefs that Chinese scientists date back to 50,000 BC. Unfortunately, there is no way in Europe to date carbon-free objects that are 50,000 years old. Some dating methods have been successful for billions of years, but carbon-14 dating can only be used up to 30,000 years ago and becomes less accurate as it approaches that limit. Thus, it is not clear how Chinese scientists established that the age of these bas-reliefs is 50,000 years. These pebbles are marked with 3 lines. 2 lines are usually straight, and 1 is broken lines of non-natural origin that did not appear by chance. According to legend, these lines are called trigrams. The legend says, Fuxi ruled over all things under heaven. He looked up and contemplated the glittering constellations, then he looked down and considered the forms he had seen on earth. He discerned the signs that adorned birds and animals, and, contemplating himself, he studied his own body, on which he also found signs of the cosmos. Having studied all this, he compiled 8 basic trigrams in order to reveal the secret of the celestial phenomena occurring in nature, as well as to comprehend everything. These trigrams have 2 main lines. A straight line means yang, sky, and a broken line means yin, earth. By grouping these lines by 3, 8 combinations are obtained, which represent the 8 trigrams of the immortal emperor. The Master of Time. It was he, as well as the learned mandarins who served him, who were able to clearly comprehend the fundamental laws of the universe. It would be interesting to know what exactly Fuxi did during his first appearance among humans, since there were others. The appearance of the immortal emperor comes during difficult times. An amazing conviction for a country where people do not believe in physical immortality. According to legend, at the end of his life he retired to other lands, to the celestial spheres or, as a variant of the legend, to a certain island. He does not age and comes out of his hiding place from time to time. Each of his appearances was accompanied by the terrifying phenomenon of Quankeo. Punishment that came from heaven. Perhaps it was he who brought it to the people, and, apparently, this punishment, which overtook people in the 14th century, stopped the development of Chinese technology. It is undeniable, and all historical research proves this, that Emperor Fuxi possessed the only way at the disposal of people to travel, so to speak, along the branches of time, and also followed in his behavior information that came from outside. The Book of I Ching is in some way an arrow perpendicular to the axis of time, which indicates which of the various branches of time should be chosen. In short, it's like a signal board. This explanation was given in 1060 by Xiao Yang. In addition, he developed binary calculus based on the Book of I Ching, which was rediscovered by Leibniz in 1679. It was this number system, which has only two digits 1 and 0, that made the development of computers possible. Around the same time, the Chinese equipped a scientific expedition to East India to study the constellations of the southern hemisphere 20 degrees from the South Pole. This expedition also studied new stars, and modern radio astronomers still use lists of new stars compiled by the Chinese, while the science of the ancient Greeks is no longer used. Around this time, the Chinese invented gunpowder. The formula that has come down to us dates back to 1044. The Chinese used gunpowder for both military projectiles and scientific purposes. In the same year 1044, extremely rich in discoveries, a magnetic compass appears, the result not of scientific research and experiments, but of the cosmic magic of Emperor Fuxi, performed by him during his next appearance in the year 1000. At the same time, a device appeared that measured the strength and indicated the direction of earthquakes. It is a vase filled with balls, from which emerge 4 dragon heads. The tremors caused by the earthquake throw balls out through one of the heads, indicating the direction of the earthquake. The distance the balls are thrown from the container allows us to measure the strength of the earthquake. This is a very poetic and quite accurate device. Then the chemical industry appeared. The book The Boiling Bottom of the Sea, written in the 11th century, talks about the production of salt and its use. At the same time, steel and various ways of using it appeared. Between 1100 and 1450, the Chinese explore the planet. Their fleet is the strongest in the world. Some ships are capable of carrying up to 1,000 people, whom they land in Madagascar or Kamchatka. In the 14th century, 18 Chinese expeditions arrived on the African continent to explore it. Then everything suddenly stops after the next appearance of the immortal emperor, who shows his displeasure. Rational explanations for this sudden stop are unconvincing. A mysterious development has taken place in China. It should be noted that it was the Chinese who were the first to discover Europe, and not vice versa. This discovery was made by explorer Zhang Qian, whose journey lasted from 138 to 126 BC. Chinese science also had knowledge of such secret disciplines as alchemy, which began to develop in 140 BC. Thanks to the works of the scientist Wei Weiyan and his textbook The Union of Three Principles, it was these sciences that gave birth to the magnetic compass, acupuncture, and the stories of battles with non-human creatures that legends speak of. Some of these creatures were called empty bags, which has no analogues in any of the fields of knowledge known to us. At the dawn of time, Emperor Fuxi apparently defeated these empty sacks and they returned to where they came from. Where? The legend is silent about this. These secret sciences also include the research of Sulu Zhe, 1029 to 1081 AD, who, guided by I Ching, is trying to establish the date of the birth of Chinese civilization. Starting from the Common Era, it goes back 129,600 years. Where does this figure come from? It would be good to receive clarifications about this long chronology, in particular, archaeological clarifications. In the absence of such, it can be assumed that the master of time traveled not only to his future but also to his past, and that this figure 129,600 years represents the extreme point to which he was able to reach. There is no doubt that from this expedition to the past he brought back knowledge about fossils, knowledge that reached us only in the 19th century, the sacred knowledge of Emperor Fuxi, preserved in Chinese writing since the 1st century AD, contained descriptions and explanations of fossils. Whatever the case may be, the important thing is that the civilization founded by Fuxi and continuing its development for 5,000 years is a civilization of time, not space. The Chinese never invented geometry, not even Euclidean. They learned it from Western missionaries. Their mathematics was very highly developed, but was purely algebraic. But starting from the 1st century, They began to develop watchmaking and since then to this day continue to find various ingenious ways to measure time. It is obvious that time interests them much more than space. Some of their theories, which are more than 3,000 years old, but which count among their supporters the most advanced scientists of our day, postulate that space does not exist and that objects can influence other objects located at truly fantastic distances from them. Needham writes, "Since the time of Sangua, there have been remarkable statements about action at a distance, carried out without physical contact over vast intervals in space." Perhaps it is precisely because the Chinese do not attach much importance to space that they think it is easy to neutralize, while time seems fundamental to them, in the Book of I King. As in the unusual Chinese watch movements, their extreme attention to time is noticeable. To foresee and control the future, to master time, these are the goals that Chinese civilization has set for itself from the very beginning. But they are little interested in space. And this is all the more curious because in this area the Chinese are significantly ahead of others. Already since the 10th century BC, they, unlike the Greeks, know that there is no crystalline sphere around the Earth, that space extends infinitely and, perhaps, there are other inhabited stars. Golden bird from Colombia, it has exhibited all over the world and, in particular, in France, in the collection of gold objects of a Colombian bank. This golden bird looks very strange, it very much resembles an airplane. The German expert J.A. Ulrich even accurately determined that this is an image of a jet aircraft, very similar to the American military aircraft S-102 and the latest model of the Swedish Saab aircraft, but this bird, undoubtedly, was recovered from a recently discovered burial in Colombia, whose age is estimated at many millennia. Melchizedek traveler. Melchizedek is first mentioned in the Bible in the book of Genesis. It says, "And Melchizedek king of Salem brought out bread and wine. He was a priest of the Most High God. And he blessed him and said, Blessed be Abraham of the Most High God, ruler of heaven and earth. And blessed be God Most High, who has delivered your enemies into your hands." Abraham gave him a tenth of everything. This happened approximately 2,200 after the creation of the world. This date could be a valuable index if it were known what exactly the Jews meant by the year and the creation of the world. But discussions over the centuries have failed to clarify these two terms. Therefore, it is absolutely impossible to determine the date of the appearance of Melchizedek. Let us just note in passing the following curious coincidence. It is not surprising that the Puritans, choosing a name for the city that they had just founded in one of the colonies of the North American continent, settled on the name Salem. What is surprising is that this city becomes the center of witchcraft phenomena, then the center of the trials of witches, the most significant in all of North America. As for the Palestinian Salem, we know nothing about him. It is unknown where he was and whether he really existed. Here is another example of the return of Melchizedek. This story happened in 1917 in Wales, in the fishing village of Landresant. A few days before the events described, 3 unknown people appeared here and announced that they were Feri Adver Melchizedek, that is, priests in the order of Melchizedek. In June 1917, they celebrated a festive mass in honor of the Holy Grail in the Protestant Church of Landresant. The people present at this service heard and repeated words in ancient Greek, a language unknown to anyone in Landresant. Then we witnessed various miraculous phenomena, confirmed even by people from other places. A gigantic circle of flame formed around the church and illuminated the surrounding area, which attracted the attention, in particular, of the British High Command, who initially mistook it for signal lights intended for German submarines. This phenomenon, which began at approximately 0:20 a.m., was confirmed by military personnel, sailors, and residents of neighboring villages. That same night, many sick people within a radius of approximately 50 kilometers were cured. One girl in particular, Olwen Phillips, from Crosswan, near Landresant, was dying of tuberculosis. She was dying, and the doctor who arrived the next morning to sign the death certificate found her completely healthy. He declared that this was scientifically impossible, and subsequently wrote in a medical journal, "It was incredible, her body was completely destroyed by tuberculosis. However, that night, young Olwen had a vision 3 people were carrying an object, the description of which, made by the girl, corresponds to the Holy Grail. And she had never heard of the Holy Grail before. The appearances of Melchizedek are recorded throughout history. In the Middle Ages in Iran, the Middle East. According to medieval legend, Melchizedek lives not on earth, but outside the earth, in the same place where the prophets Elijah and Enoch are located. And also that he is out of time. This expression is mentioned dozens of times in the Jewish scriptures. The mysterious abbot Tritham represents Melchizedek as an eldel, that is, not yet God, but a being superior to the angels. This category can be found in Nat Villius in the 17th century and then in the 20th century in C.S. Lewis. Lewis, quoting Natwilius, clarifies that the eldel cannot be located either in space or in time. Jewish history of the Middle Ages reports multiple appearances of Melchizedek to rabbis or even scholars of the Kabbalah, apparitions dating back to the period between the 7th and 18th centuries of the Christian era. Each time the fact is emphasized that Melchizedek appears from outside and, at will, returns to where he came from. One would hope that with the existing amount of archaeological excavations carried out in Israel, modern rational criticism would have had significant information about this character. Nothing like this. For example, Professor Helmer Ringgren, a teacher at the University of Uppsala, did not find Salim anywhere, neither in space nor in time. From this he concludes that Salim is simply Jerusalem. In any case, even in rationalist criticism, Melchizedek appears as the man who invented God. Ringgren writes, using the initial letters JHWH, which stand for the word God and the meaning of which is unknown. JHWH was present but invisible and was the master, and Israel was powerless against him. A person with such an unusual idea or such unusual information was, of course, not a simple person. The king of a city that cannot be found, the prophet of a new and powerful God, he possessed, in addition, extremely rare mobility in time. Regardless of any religious judgment, it seems interesting to us that Melchizedek in the Bible is called the King High Priest, who is a prophet of Christ. The fact that the Holy Scriptures are strangely silent about his ancestors and his descendants suggests that the holy order which he represents is eternal. Swiss watch. The 1940 Swiss watch in a 400-year-old tomb in an excavation that took place in December of 2008, archaeologists stumbled upon a mystery that sent ripples through both the scientific and paranormal communities within a sealed tomb in Shaanxi, China, which had not been opened for over 400 years. They found a small yet unmistakably modern artifact, a tiny gold watch. This watch, no larger than a ring, was intricately carved with the word Swiss on its back. Given that the tomb dated back to the Ming Dynasty, it was a baffling discovery. How could a piece of 1940 design end up in a tomb that had been undisturbed for 4 centuries? Moses in time travel. The first time travel is not described in our time and not in a science fiction story. We find it in the collection of Jewish stories, the Haggadah, which is part of the Talmud. This text which we quote is taken from Edmund Flegg's Hebrew anthology, and doubtless dates back to the 5th century AD. This text is not canonical and, therefore, believers may not recognize it. Let's call it more of a parable. At that hour, when Moses ascended to the heights, he found there the Most High, blessed be he, adorning the letters of the Torah with crowns. "O, Lord of the world!" he exclaimed. "Who will stop you from giving me these letters without crowns?" The Lord answered, "Man will come after many generations. His name will be Akiba ben Joseph, and to each of these signs he will add new interpretations." "Master of the world," said Moses, "let me see him." "Turn around and go." Moses went and sat down in the last of the 8 rows in Akiba's school, but he did not understand anything that was said there, and his strength became weakness. And when Akiba spoke, his disciples asked, "Rabbi, how do you know this?" He replied, "From the teaching that Moses received at Sinai." And then Moses' mind calmed down. He again appeared before the Almighty, blessed be he, and said to him, "Lord of the world, you have such a person, and do you want to pass on your Torah through me?" And the Lord answered him, "Shut up. This is my will. At the beginning of the 2nd century AD, Rabbi Eliezer said, "A miracle is not proof." Miracles and movements in time are associated with sorcerers, who are mentioned in the texts with extreme caution. It seems, indeed, that returning to the past and miracles could contribute to the resurrection of the dead, but this is strictly prohibited. All this points to the limits of divine omnipotence. These boundaries are defined in Abraham ibn Bad's treatise Selfless Faith. The Lord created the possible as such, and he knows with absolute accuracy only the subjectively possible, which is objectively necessary. Because what happens to a person is not always completely desired by the Lord. Perhaps these events, which occur not by the will of the Lord, but thanks to the free choice of man, should also include movement in time. This topic, however, was hardly discussed, as if there was some kind of taboo for people. Like many other things, time travel is the prerogative of the great ones, and also the ancient great ones. Thus, the Zohar wonderfully describes in his secret book one of the great people of antiquity as follows. From the secret book we learned that this most ancient of the ancients, the most mysterious of the mysterious, the mysterious of the mysterious, cannot be completely defined. It is only known that this is the oldest of the old, the most ancient of the ancients, the mysterious of the mysterious. His essence is only slightly revealed by his creations. He is the Lord in white clothes and with a shining face. He sits on a throne formed by sheaves of flame. This text contains the best description we have of the Lord of Time. Starting from the 10th century AD, the diaspora, the Jewish people scattered around the world, began to receive regular visits. The guest is described in myths that clearly outline the contents of 3 different myths. The myth of the prophet Elijah ascended to heaven in a chariot of fire. The myth of the eternal Jew, a taboo for Jews, since it speaks of Christ, but which, nevertheless, forms part of the myth of the guest. The myth of Moses, who moves through different eras and then returns to his past. This myth about the guest remains so relevant today that during some family holidays he is still given a place at the table. For example, on Easter. This place is called the place of the prophet Elijah. I saw this with my own eyes in 1920 in the city of Kriemnitz, located in Polish Volyn. There were many families there to whom this guest had previously appeared, always the same person in ordinary clothes. He said that he comes from afar and returns there. Unfortunately, no one thought to photograph it, since this was already in the modern era. As far as I know, the last time he visited Safed, Israel, was shortly before the Six-Day War. The guest, the green face, is probably in the Gnostic sense of the word an aeon, that is, an eternal being, a person who owns time. Simon the sorcerer met him and wrote a book about him, Revelation of the Voice and Name, which, unfortunately, has not reached us. We know several anecdotal amusing stories about the wandering Gnostic Simon the sorcerer, who traveled around the Middle East 17 years after the death of Christ. He was a Samaritan, led a dubious lifestyle and took a prostitute with him everywhere, whom he had previously snatched from the brothel of Tyre. He worked miracles. The Acts of the Apostles says, in the city of Samaria there lived a man named Simon, who performed miracles and delighted the inhabitants of Samaria. He pretended to be someone great, and everyone, old and young, listened to him. As for the guest, who could be in the 10th century in Florence or in the 20th century in Safed, who is called Moses, who appears in our time, he, remarkably, behaves like a simple observer, and not like an actor. It seems that he does not interfere in what is happening, and when he sits down at the table, he listens more than he speaks. It should be noted that the myth of the ghost never had anything in common with the myth of the Messiah. There have been many messiahs, real and fictitious, in the diaspora. They all promised liberation, while the guest promised nothing. The last of the famous messiahs, whose history is known for certain, was called Sabbatai Zevi. He was born in 1626 and died in 1676. He managed to convince many Jews, as well as Turks and Muslims, but he was unable to perform miracles. He eventually converted to Islam. Everything is known about the life of the messiahs, and absolutely nothing about the guest, about this time-independent creature who has been regularly appearing for at least 10 centuries. And the text that opens this chapter gives us the first description of the ability to move through time. invade the future, and then return to the starting point. The time-traveling hipster, a photograph from 1941 of genuine authenticity of the reopening of the South Fork Bridge in Gold Bridge, British Columbia, is sometimes alleged on the internet to show a time traveler. It was claimed that his clothing and sunglasses were of the present day and not of the styles worn in the 40s, while his camera was anachronistically small. Further research suggested that the present-day appearance of the man would not have necessarily been out of place in 1941. The style of sunglasses he is wearing first appeared in the 1920s. On first glance, the man is taken by many to be wearing a printed t-shirt, but on closer inspection it seems to be a sweater with a sewn-on emblem. The kind of clothing often worn by sports teams of the period. The shirt resembles one that was used by the Montreal Maroons, an ice hockey team from that era. The remainder of his clothing would appear to have been available at the time, though his clothes are far more casual than those worn by the other individuals in the photograph. His camera is smaller than most of that era, but cameras of that size did exist. While it is unclear what make his camera was, Kodak had manufactured portable cameras of equivalent size since 1938. The time-traveling hipster became a case study in viral internet phenomena, which was presented at the Museums and the Web 2011 conference in Philadelphia. Leonardo da Vinci. Some very respectable scientists have proposed introducing the term Leonardo da Vinci effect to denote the intuitive feeling of the future, its natural prediction. The theme of Leonardo da Vinci's visitor from the future is a classic theme in science fiction literature, and there are at least a dozen short stories and novels that mention it. In the biography of Leonardo da Vinci, there are a number of points that are indisputable for everyone, even if we take into account that there are many blank spots in it. Leonardo da Vinci was born in 1452 and died in 1519. Leonardo is an artist, a bit of a sculptor, and mainly an engineer. The source for our subsequent narrative will not be science fiction stories, but absolutely reliable facts, established, in particular, thanks to newspapers, as well as the diaries of Leonardo da Vinci himself. First of all, Leonardo is the first ecologist. Ecology, the science of communication and interaction of various forms of life, despite all the absurdities that occur because of it today, is a useful science and, very likely, necessary for our survival. Leonardo was the first to describe an ecological system. Its main idea is based on the water cycle. Water for him is the blood of the earth, the source of all life, the basic and most important element of all creatures of plant or animal origin. He constantly returns to this idea in his diaries and in his notes. It is impossible to imagine how he came to this conclusion, but he knew that a person is 90% water. And so it is. For him, water is the beginning and the end. He imagines a series of floods and describes one of them in a work that may qualify as the first science fiction story. The idea of water is his most important idea, the axis around which his thought revolves. Moreover, this is the only reliable element on which we can rely in understanding Leonardo's psychology. We don't know what Leonardo himself thought about himself. When he talks about himself to one or another possible patron of the arts, he calls himself exclusively a military engineer. The fact that he paints and draws seems insignificant to him. One might think that where he came from, everyone is fluent in painting and drawing, and, therefore, talents in this area are not of great importance. The water cycle causes prophecies. But from the very beginning, Leonardo prophesies. A series of records made in Milan and dating back to 1494 are called prophecies. Moreover, he tried to apply his engineering methods to painting and other forms of art. Leonardo describes machines that are perfect, from a logical point of view, that were impossible to construct at that time. His inventions are amazing. First of all, these are his flying machines, which, unlike other similar inventions of the time, do not flap their wings like birds. Leonardo's flying machines resemble either helicopters, airboats, or gliders. We also find in Leonardo descriptions of tanks, parachutes, and submarines. In addition, they say that he had other works that he allegedly had to destroy due to their excessive danger. Leonardo also describes an amphibious man, spacesuits. military vehicles, cannons, and machine guns. In a note addressed to one of his future patrons, Duke Ludovico Sforza, Leonardo writes, "Your Excellency, I have carefully studied the works of everyone who considers themselves masters of pyrotechnics and military machines, and I am ready to present you with my secret inventions." Next he gives an impressive list of them. Very light and very strong bridge, a number of battering ram guns designed to destroy enemy fortifications, a mortar-type weapon that shoots a huge number of small stones and produces smoke that terrorizes the enemy, a secret passage that can be constructed silently, camouflaged carriages, behind which the movement of entire armies can be hidden. In his youth, as a poor Florentine, he learned to read, write, and use an abacus. Then he becomes a student of Verrocchio and moves exclusively in artistic circles. However, he is fluent in mathematics. In addition, he has precise knowledge of physics and chemistry. Moreover, he speaks of the existence of a certain fluid substance that has a greater ability to penetrate than water and is the cause of lightning. Where did he get this knowledge from? Moreover, when did he receive them? On the other hand, Leonardo is perfectly familiar with the works of Archimedes, written in Greek. Sir Kenneth Clark suggests he probably had translations of them into Latin. But their presence at that time has not been proven. And then, without realizing this discrepancy, he adds that Leonardo himself learned Latin only in 1494. If you study all this carefully, you inevitably come to the conclusion that Leonardo had to acquire his extraordinary knowledge in some other life. In his own there was neither sufficient time nor the opportunity to obtain it. Sir Kenneth Clark admits that the life of Leonardo da Vinci is a great puzzle that has not yet been completely solved and about which much remains to be learned. To do this you need to have enormous erudition. Most of them, moreover, obviously were not inquisitive enough and did not ask themselves many questions. For example, Sir Kenneth Clark, in his work, personally notes the presence in Leonardo's diaries of sketches of birds in flight, made in such a way that it was necessary to have slow motion for this. In this regard, he concludes, without a doubt, the optic nerves and nerves of Leonardo's brain were significantly superior to the norm, which allowed him to see and visually separate ultra-fast movements. No human being has ever been endowed with such sensitive and rapid sense organs. At the same time, common sense tells us that Leonardo da Vinci could not have seen the film in slow motion. That is why he predicts a flood, not only a water flood, but also a fiery flood. The drawings accompanying these entries are frightening. Leonardo da Vinci is also convinced that civilization periodically dies, and that this will happen again. And everything suggests that he knows the duration of the cycle in which he lives. Throughout his life, Leonardo apparently was never persecuted, and completed his anatomical studies after receiving a friendly warning from Pope Leo X, after which he continued his dissection work in church hospitals. In particular in hospital at the Church of Santa Maria Nuovia in Florence. Consequently, he wrote his notes from right to left, not to hide his thoughts, nor out of fear of persecution. However, if he wanted to hide something, he could easily use his knowledge of secret writing, which he considered one of the most interesting mathematical games. However, he never resorted to it. He destroyed the most dangerous of his inventions, and described the rest in detail. We are not sure that all the documents left by Leonardo da Vinci have been discovered, but those that we have suggest a man not from here, not from his time. Woman spotted chatting on phone in 1938 video. In an unbelievable sight, a woman was spotted appearing to use a mobile phone in a video from the 1930s. The clip has left the tinfoil hat-wearing internet users convinced the footage is proof of time travel. But those who don't spend their time reading the obscure forums aren't so sure. In an eerie clip captured in 1938, a woman in vintage getup can be seen walking in a crowd while appearing to speak into an object that she's holding to her ear. In the footage, which first circulated the web back in 2013, the group looked as though it was leaving a factory building. A YouTuber known as Planet Check claimed at the time of upload that the woman in the video was an aunt of theirs called Gertrude Jones. According to Yahoo, Planet Check penned almost a decade ago. She was 17 years old when the video was filmed. I asked her about this video and she remembers it quite clearly. she says DuPont had a telephone communications section in the factory. They were experimenting with wireless telephones. Gertrude and 5 other women were given these wireless phones to test out for a week. Michael Scott. Speaking about Michael Scott, it is difficult to name the exact dates of his life. But its true existence, on the contrary, is historically reliable. Its first official appearance dates back to 1217, and it happened in Toledo. He was a doctor of science, but it is not known which university he came from. We have no information about the date and place of his birth or his origins. In 1236, in one work of the court poet of Emperor Frederick II, in Sicily, there is a mention of his death. That's all we know about him. However, between 1217 and 1236 he established himself as a great magician. He gives off such a strong aura that in his presence things seem different from what they usually are. It is said that the towers of Notre Dame Cathedral shook when he came to Paris. In Toledo he translates al-Batrogi's treatise on the sphere from Arabic. From 1220 to 1227 he was in the service of the Pope. In May 1224, he offered him the bishopric of Cashel in Ireland, but Scotus refused. In April 1227, Pope Gregory recommended that the bishopric of Canterbury grant Michael Scott a scholarship. His erudition is extraordinary, and besides, he knows all languages, especially Hebrew and Arabic. After which Michael Scott goes into the service of Emperor Frederick II in Sicily, where his court is located. Frederick II, like later King Louis II of Bavaria, clearly suffered from neurosis. But he also encouraged the development of science and art. Especially in the field that is now called pseudoscientific, such as astrology and alchemy, Michael Scott becomes his advisor, and Dante places him in his infernal circle among the great soothsayers. His reputation is impressive. His first book, Liber Introductorius, deals with astronomy and astrology, and also summarizes Scotus' original work. They already talk about Copernicus, as well as about cosmic rays and habitable planets. The second book of Liber Particularis talks about the nature of time, its measurement, its relationship to infinity. It contains a dialogue with Frederick II, who, despite his weakness of reason, asks very sensible questions. This book also contains references to time travel, and finally, his book Physiognomia, which should be discussed in more detail. In it, Scotus asks the following fundamental question: what is power? And he gives the answer to it: the only worthwhile power is the power of spirit over spirit. Controlling a large amount of inanimate mass is nothing. Real power lies in making other minds submit to your will. This is the only way to dominate other people. Next, he presents this idea in more detail. He shows how you can recognize a person's innermost thoughts by his face, behavior, and reactions. He explains that even more can be learned about this based on what a person dreams about. And all this in 1230. Next, he begins to expound the theory of a secret art that allows one to control a person's dreams, and then stops, since, according to him, the emperor wants to keep this most important of knowledge for himself, and he forbade the author to tell too much. But judging by what is written in the book Physiognomia, it is safe to say that Scotus discovered the very principle that Sigmund Freud would report only 7 centuries later: he who has eyes to see and ears to hear. He quickly becomes convinced that it is simply impossible for mere mortals to hide anything. It seems that Scotus has achieved the only worthwhile power, the control of one spirit over another. And another legend. The myth of Michael Scott is perhaps too impressive. All magical powers are attributed to him. Resurrection of the dead, artificial creation of life, transformation of elements, climate control. He predicted the future with such accuracy that he gained fame as a wizard. But, it seems, he never compiled horoscopes in the modern sense of the word. He practiced alchemy and apparently succeeded in transforming base metals into gold. All this presupposes the highest level of culture. However, we know nothing about how he received his education. This Scott, and we know about this exclusively from his words, and perhaps his origin has nothing to do with Scotland in general, or with the Scotland of his times, appears unexpectedly and is immediately perceived, without any evidence, as a certified scientist. And this at a time when the university and church elite had unlimited power. Moreover, the church never interfered with him or persecuted him for heretical or blasphemous acts. Thus, Scotus is an omniscient person, who appeared from nowhere, who left this world unknown, in possession of a secret that clearly belongs to our future, his interest in time, his ability to predict the future, his impressive knowledge of humanity's past. All this suggests that his connection with time is not like the connection with time of an ordinary person, from the point of view of official world history, which should not be neglected. Scotus's significant merit is that he enriched medieval Christian humanity of the 13th century with knowledge about other civilizations. First of all, about the civilization of the Greek worldview, he is talking about Aristotle. In addition, he translates the works of Arab scholars and thus introduces Europe to the Arab civilization, which belongs to the same era, but differs from the Christian one. Moreover, taking into account the importance of this task, by the way, no one forced him to search and translate ancient texts, and he never had any financial assistance, except for subsidies from Pope Gregory IX, until the moment when he began working at the court of the Emperor Frederick II. It seems to us that the role of Michael Scott was to reveal to all who could understand the secret of the complete spiritual subordination of one person to another. Today we know less about this than he did, and this radiance emanating from Michael Scott, and which delighted Dante, his interest in time, his omniscience, as well as his mastery of the psychological methodology of the future, all this leads us to think that before us is the secret Lord of Time, and by no means a simple missionary. Woman appearing to hold an iPhone in an 1860 painting. The internet has been bamboozled by a 162-year-old painting where a woman appears to be holding a smartphone. Take a look at Ferdinand George Waldmüller's The Expected One and you'll immediately see a woman in the center of the painting walking through a scenic landscape to a man awaiting in the bushes, holding a pink flower. Through a 21st century lens, it seems as though the woman is scrolling through her iPhone while on her walk. But that obviously wouldn't make any sense since the iPhone was released in 2007 and the painting was completed in 1860. Roger Boskovich, Ruggiero Giuseppe Boskovich, was born in Dubrovnik on May 18, 1711, lived and died all his life in Milan. He left Italy only when the Jesuit order was banned there in 1740. Then he went to France and became director of optical communications in the Navy Ministry. In 1726, he joined the Society of Christ and became professor of mathematics at its university. A secular Jesuit, generously endowed with a sense of humor, he wrote beautifully. He was interested in archaeology, physics, and chemistry. And in a number of different areas he was ahead of not only his own era, but also our era. Here, for example, are several of his assumptions, taken separately, surprisingly innovative. Establishment of an international geophysical year, malaria infection through mosquitoes, the possibilities of using rubber, an idea carried out by another Jesuit, his friend La Condamine, the presence of planets around stars other than our sun, the inability to localize the psyche in a specific place in the body, conservation of the quantity particle of motion in the world, a law discovered only in 1958 and known as Planck's constant. He wrote a lot. The most amazing of his books, written in 1758, is Theoria Philosophiae Naturalis. Boskovich begins his theory with a series of numbered assumptions in which the facts are not supported by any evidence. Of course, this is not the traditional scientific method. But perhaps it was extremely difficult for him to talk about where he got his knowledge from, but his assumptions are far ahead of that era, and sometimes even ours. This is the assumption of Physica Ziv, which explains the phenomenon of comet tails by the effect of pressure from solar radiation, as well as the assumption of Physica XXXIV, according to which lightning is an electrical discharge between the clouds and the ground. Many of his speculations are considered to be far ahead of their time. In particular, the assumption of statistics and possibility, according to which any accident can happen, would have enough time for it to happen. Boskovich writes, if all the letters that together form one of Virgil's poems are poured into one bag, and then taken out and placed one next to the other, and this operation continued ad infinitum, then after a certain number of combinations there will be one that corresponds to this poem of Virgil. Willard Gibbs in the 19th century, and Borel in the 20th, came to the same conclusion, but Boskovich wrote this back in 1758, just as he announces modern statistics. Boskovich announces relativity. This is 1758. Here is a brief summary of the particular principle of relativity that Einstein announced in 1905, so, calmly, like a person who does not assume, but sets out exact facts. He speaks about the possibility of reaching star worlds located outside our universe, our time, penetrating solid matter, being in several different places at the same time, about the existence of such universes, in which our universe is comparable to only one of the atoms, and also about time travel, in his book. Published in 1758, Boskovich suggests that space, time, and motion are discontinuous, made up of particles. As for motion and matter, this theory appears at the beginning of the 20th century. This is Planck's quantum theory. It is impossible that it was stated in the 18th century. And that's exactly what happened. As for time and space, this is the science of the future. And the conclusions he draws from this theory are so bold that they are far ahead of the most advanced ideas of physics in 1974. Even in Einstein, even in Newton, we do not find such courage of imagination as in Boskovich. Around the same time, Gauss discovers non-Euclidean geometry, but does not dare to publish his works. Boskovich calmly sets forth the truths of the future, like a man who is not afraid of either human opinion or the thunder of the church. And even if he was harsh towards fools, he was never persecuted or considered crazy. Already at that time, it quickly became clear that he knew everything, read everything, studied everything. He is consulted on all problems, in particular how to prevent rivers from eroding their banks, how to repair the dome of St. Peter's Basilica in Rome, or open sites for archaeological excavations, or cure patients with malaria. Sometimes he is a diplomat on a secret mission. And above all, he is a very personable scientist. On June 26, 1760, he became a member of the Royal Society, and in honor of this event he composed a delightful, as they say, poem of gratitude. The dates of his birth and death may as well be fictitious. Civil status acts were not registered at that time. And if his documents were presented upon admission to the Jesuit college, then, as a rule, they did not study them very carefully. This also happened in cases when it came to illegitimate children of important people. Death certificates in those days, as a rule, were also compiled very inaccurately. Elizabeth Hill, who is the best of Boskovich's biographers, writes that his birth certificate has not been found, but only an entry made in the baptism registers of children in Dubrovnik. She also claims that after his death, any funeral procession was prohibited and that his grave was lost. Obviously, there was no hint of any autopsy or medical examination ever performed on Boskovich. What is known is that he was buried in Milan and that he died on February 13, 1787 at 11 a.m. After his death, eulogies in his honor began to be heard from all sides. Everyone noted his temper, the irritation that he showed when forced to live among people whom he considered fools. The astronomer Lalande, who gave a speech at the French Academy, said the following about his bad character: this was his only flaw, which was compensated by all the other qualities that generally make up a great man. In this case, he can disseminate his knowledge without fear of any shocks, since, having appeared from the future, he already knows that thereby he will not change history. Boskovich visited Voltaire, Lalande, Benjamin Franklin, as well as the extraordinary Baron de Gleichen, the spiritual mentor of the nascent Freemasonry, the author, in particular, of such an interesting phrase, a penchant for everything miraculous, inherent from birth in all people, my special interest in everything incredible, anxiety about my habitual skepticism, my contempt for what we know, and my respect for everything unknown. These are the motives that drew me on a journey through imaginary spaces, in London. Boskovich visits the Unseen College and the alchemists and appears to maintain a relationship and exchange information with Cavendish. He then travels through Europe and Asia, especially carefully studying those places in which Schliemann would discover Troy a century later. His thirst for sharing his knowledge was so great that when he broke his leg while leaving his carriage in June 1768, he continued to lecture while lying in bed and receiving students in his room. A sorcerer from Brussels treated his leg with a mysterious ointment. This sorcerer, someone named Vogel, continued his treatment from a distance using sympathy powder, which helped Boskovich avoid amputation. In 1758, Boskovich revealed part of his knowledge in the book Theoria Philosophiae Naturalis, then edited and republished it in 1763. Boskovich writes in Latin, and an English translation appears in 1922. Oddly enough, there is no French translation of this book. Undoubtedly, the theory contains a large number of discoveries, so numerous that it is impossible to list them here. Here is a list of them, compiled by Lancelot Law White, one of the most prominent philosophers of the modern scientific world. He writes, "The theory contains excellent passages where it speaks of continuity, geometry, and permeability. About worlds that, without reacting to each other or interacting, float one through the other, about superdense forms of matter, about outdated worlds, about extreme points, about internal structures, about complex molecular fields, about chain reactions, about probability, about that the world can never return to its previous state, about the importance of proportionality, about gravitational mass, about inertial mass." But most of these provisions belong to the most advanced areas of modern mathematical physics. Some are far ahead of it, such as intersecting worlds, which in science fiction are called parallel worlds. Such luminaries in the field of physics as Young, Faraday, Maxwell and Kelvin consider Boskovich a great harbinger. Mendeleev compared him to Copernicus. It appears that in other countries, Fechner, Weber, Helmholtz, Hertz, Lorentz. Looking at this list, we can say that Boskovich succeeded. But where did he get his information? If the pace of development of science remains the same as it has been until today, we can consider that Boskovich's theory corresponds to the level of development of science of the 23rd century. He speaks of time outside our time, that is, consisting of moments that do not belong to the present, past, or future. Was it really this time outside of time that helped him move in our usual time? Maybe Boskovich used it to appear from the future? Andrew Carlssin was supposedly arrested in March 2003 for SEC violations for making 126 high-risk stock trades and being successful on every one. As reported, Carlssin started with an initial investment of $800 and ended with over $350 million, which drew the attention of the SEC. Later reports suggest that after his arrest, he submitted a 4-hour confession wherein he claimed to be a time traveler from 200 years in the future. He offered to tell investigators such things as the whereabouts of Osama bin Laden and the cure for AIDS in return for a lesser punishment and to be allowed to return to his time craft, although he refused to tell investigators the location or workings of his craft. A mysterious man posted his bail and Carlssin was scheduled for court hearing but was never seen again. Records show that he never existed. The Carlssin story likely originated as a fictional piece in Weekly World News, a satirical newspaper, and was later repeated by Yahoo News, where its fictitious nature became less apparent. It was soon reported by other newspapers and magazines as fact. This in turn drove word-of-mouth spread through email inboxes and internet forums, leading to far more detailed descriptions of events. Oliver Heavyside, alone, cut off from the world of science and from the world in general, unable to communicate and be understood even with the help of mathematics, so poor and abandoned by everyone that sometimes, in order not to die of hunger, he can only rely on a piece of bread that he brought by a compassionate postman. He was born on May 13, 1850, and died on February 3, 1925 in Torquay, England. In terms of practical discoveries, we owe to him the telephone cable laid across the Atlantic Ocean. His research into the phenomena occurring inside a telephone cable actually made it possible to manufacture cables and relays in such a way that it became possible to establish communications across the Atlantic. And then across other oceans. But I would like to draw special attention to two other of his discoveries. which speak about the unusualness of the character himself. The first is a mystery that has been solved in our time, but has haunted scientists around the world for a good quarter of a century. It is known that wireless telegraphy, television, and radar use so-called radio waves, which can be defined as invisible light. They are longer than infrared waves, which are at the edge of the visible, but since the spectrum of electromagnetic waves is continuous, it is impossible to say with certainty exactly where infrared waves end and radio waves begin. Let's say, to simplify, that the length of infrared waves is less than 1/10 of a millimeter. And above this value radio waves begin. The mystery that has troubled scientists to the point that they began to doubt science in general is this: these waves travel in a straight line, like light. Therefore, they would have to be interrupted due to the curvature of the Earth. Indeed, we cannot see the light of the lighthouse in Le Havre if we ourselves are in New York. Light waves are invisible due to the curvature of the Earth. Consequently, it was believed that it was impossible to use radio waves to establish communications between continents and with ships on the high seas. Hertz, who first discovered and received these waves, answered exactly this way to one engineer who offered to sell him this invention. Calculations made it possible to completely exclude the possibility of practical use of radio waves over long distances. However, Marconi, who did not believe in the theory, managed to establish radio communications between England and America at the end of the 19th century. Mathematically, this was impossible, but in practice it was possible. From this point on, Wells rightly predicts, in the novel The First Men on the Moon, that it is possible to use radio waves for communication between the Moon and the Earth. This is what happened in life. We all saw on television the first steps of the astronauts on our satellite. How did waves that travel in a straight line from England reach the United States? It was assumed that they passed through the ground. Experience has shown that this is not so. It was assumed that they passed through the water of the oceans. And again, experience has shown that this is not true. According to other versions, they walked through the fourth dimension or through the astral world of spirits. This last hypothesis was so successful that in 1920 the great inventor Edison proposed and set himself the goal of constructing a radio telephone for communicating with the dead. The very foundations and logic of science collapsed. Among other things, it was noticed that if you use short waves with a length of between 5 and 15 meters, very little energy is required to establish communications. For example, between France and Australia or between Russia and Tierra del Fuego, a simple pocket battery was enough. A simple flashlight consumes the same amount. They talked more and more often about fluids, about astral bodies, about the universal soul and other nonsense. A wide variety of things were explained by telepathy, and they came up with witchcraft using waves. Since they were considered omnipotent, then Heavyside appeared. It took him 10 years, 1910 to 1920, to be understood. He believed that the sky has an invisible reflector that transmits light waves and reflects radio waves. Thanks to sequential reflection from this mirror, waves could travel from one specific point to any point on the Earth. This idea, simultaneously expressed independently of Heavyside by the Harvard scientist Kennelly, came true. The Heavyside mirror, now called the ionosphere, does exist. The ionosphere transmits light, heat and short waves, thanks to which we can communicate with astronauts, receive radar echoes from other planets in the solar system, and also, in principle, send signals to other stars. But this amazing discovery was made thanks to Heavyside, who secluded himself on his farm in Devonshire. Without a laboratory or anything at all, we are talking about symbolic computation. Mathematics is primarily the science of proof. Nothing will be accepted that cannot be proven. Even the truths that seem the most obvious. Which leads to the fact that in arithmetic, for example, the most obvious thing, in the eyes of an ignorant person, has not yet been proven, that 1 + 1 = 2. Everyone has their own opinion about this concept of mathematics. Until, in 1890, Heavyside proposed his symbolic calculation, which is mathematics without proof. Heavyside said, "It's true because I say so," and this was true in the sense in which all systems based on his calculations worked, such as transatlantic telephone cables, various transformers, and electrical devices, but for scientists it was simply magic. and therefore Heavyside's work was not recognized. There is no place for wizards in science. Immediately this unfortunate man was deprived of all means for his miserable existence. In addition, he lost his hearing, which prevented him from continuing his work at the telephone company, where he had previously worked until 1874. Poor and misunderstood, he still survived. In 1892 he managed to save some money and publish a book called Electrical Papers, a stunningly brilliant book. Later he would no longer have the means to publish books at his own expense. Nevertheless, sometimes he managed to save 3 pence, which was enough to pay for a stamp for a letter abroad. So, after 1905, he sends a letter to Einstein, in which he writes, "Despite the fact that you are an ignorant person, you are, nevertheless, not as stupid as the rest of the inhabitants of this planet. If you want your calculations to succeed, you need to do the following." Einstein was not a mathematician, he was an engineer who specialized in patenting inventions. At the same time, he was excellent at mathematics. But he never managed to understand the symbolic calculation. Much later, after Heavyside's death, another mutant similar to him, the great mathematician Norbert Wiener, famous mainly for his discovery of cybernetics, which, by the way, is the least significant of his works, proved that Heavyside's mathematics had a rational basis, unknown even to him. Author, and that it is possible to relate this mathematics to the work of Fourier, the great French mathematician of the 19th century. How did Heavyside manage to invent mathematics without resorting to mathematical methods? Until now, no one has been able to explain this. I offer the following explanation. Heavyside knew the mathematics of the future. Without understanding the evidence, certainly using methods that have not yet been invented. But knowing the results, of course, I will be reproached for my overly rich imagination. But perhaps the facts themselves will justify me. When Heavyside died in 1925, he left behind 3 large suitcases filled with documents that were never properly examined. Perhaps, by examining them, we will learn about sciences that came from the future, or about that mysterious world with which the hermit from Devonshire maintained contact. Modern great mathematicians, for example René Thom, believe that mathematicians never invent anything, they only find what already exists in nature. Heavyside's symbolic calculation already existed. But where? But when, for someone accustomed to working with scientific methods? Working with Heavyside's symbolic calculations evokes a chill that is difficult to define. We can only draw analogies. Let's imagine, for example, that a periodic table of chemical elements is compiled based on their names in French, and that this table works. Or that there is a prime number between the numbers 2 and 3. Or the fact that certain mathematical formulas are compiled that are valid only for a certain conjunction of planets. These are the assumptions you come to when faced with Heavyside's symbolic calculation. It's magic. But how did Heavyside's mind come to this? Nobody knows this, because he was denied the right to speak out. He was denied the publication of his works sent to scientific journals. Only a few of his discoveries have been examined, in particular about the ionosphere, but until now there has been no serious and comprehensive analysis of the documents he left behind. In some of his letters he writes, "I am not from here," or "I come from the future." With admirable persistence, until his death in 1925, he continued to state mathematical and physical facts, which all turned out to be correct. So, long before Einstein and for other purposes, he talked about increasing mass with increasing speed. His contribution to mathematics is significant, although he did not provide proofs. Sometimes it is enough to know the theorem itself to begin its proof. In other cases, a partial solution to a problem can lead to its complete solution. Heavyside's creativity, both during his life and after his death, was an inexhaustible source. Why haven't his unpublished works been studied yet? It is quite legitimate to ask how Heavyside differs from the insane. However, the answer is simple. The fact that generators and distribution systems designed according to Heavyside's calculations are used to supply electricity to cities, and the fact that every home has electricity, proves that Heavyside is not crazy. Among other things, in terms of experimental physics, he turned out to be right. if it is stated that symbolic calculation helps to solve some mathematical problems, that it simplifies complex operations used both in mathematics and physics, then this means that the author of symbolic calculation was not crazy. However, I find this idea, which Heavyside communicated using mathematics, extremely puzzling. He received his knowledge from a source that was external to him, and which I personally would be willing to accommodate in the future. Riddle of planes and helicopter found in Egyptian hieroglyphs. The 3,000-year-old hieroglyphs found in Seti I's temple in Abydos, Egypt, are said to depict nothing less than a helicopter, plane, and futuristic aircraft among the usual insects, symbols, and snakes. The writings have become known as the helicopter hieroglyphs among pseudoscience and conspiracy circles, with many supporters of the theory saying if the ancient civilization was putting helicopters and modern spacecraft in their artwork, then they must have seen them, or at least pictures of them, and for that to have happened, someone from the future must have taken them back. Some have even taken the theory a step further, introducing aliens to the equation. One popular myth is that the advanced race who brought details of futuristic technology to the Egyptians were visitors from a far-flung highly advanced planet, to share their knowledge with the primitive communities on Earth. Flip phone is spotted during 1962 World Cup final celebrations. Footy fans have claimed there is a time traveler lurking in this iconic picture of the 1962 World Cup final celebrations. The historical image of Brazil's captain Mauro Ramos triumphantly raising the trophy in Chile has more than meets the eye. As well as being remembered as an eventful day on the pitch, the final has now ignited a bizarre debate after appearing to have been infiltrated by a fan from the future. If you look closely at the gaggle of reporters and photographers trying to get close to Ramos, you may spot something that doesn't quite fit in. Directly in front of the center back, a person's arm can be seen wielding a recording device that looks suspiciously like a flip phone. And the strange object even caught the eye of the victorious Brazilian, who appears to be staring right at it. Despite the legendary flip phone not being on the market for another 3 decades, this futuristic football fan seems to be years ahead of the rest of the crowd. However, there is a simple explanation for the supposedly time-traveling spectator appearing to capture the moment on a flip phone. Laptop spotted in ancient Greek statue. People are going nuts over an ancient Greek statue that some say depicts a woman using a laptop with USB ports. Yes, a laptop. As in, could this be evidence that time travel exists? The statue, grave Niskos of an enthroned woman with an attendant, is on display at the J. Paul Getty Museum in Malibu, California, and was used as a funeral marker in 100 BC. The sculpture, which is a little over 37 inches tall, depicts a woman sitting on a throne-like chair as a young servant holds open a thin box for her to inspect. In 2014, a video on the YouTube channel Still Speaking Out claimed the object could be proof of time travel, the Daily Mail reported. In the YouTube video, the group says the object is too wide to be a jewelry box and notes that the woman is looking at the screen like one would with a laptop. The statue depicts an astonishing object that bears a striking resemblance to a modern laptop or some handheld device, the YouTube video says. With renewed interest in the sculpture, people are again commenting on the video and on social media. Naysayers to the laptop theory, and there are a lot, say that the object could be many different things, including a small pizza or a cosmetic box. The object looks a lot like a wax tablet that Greeks used for writing with a stylus, according to bioarchaeologist Christina Kilgrove of Forbes, who recently debunked the theory. And even if it's not a wax tablet, Kilgrove notes that despite the thin edges of the box, the artist may still have meant it to depict a jewelry box. It's not until the Romans embraced realism that we get truly realistic depictions of people and things, after all, Kilgrove reported. And as for the USB ports? Greta Thunberg. When 16-year-old environment activist Greta Thunberg isn't busy challenging global leaders to reduce their carbon footprint or mobilizing young people to strike for the climate, she's time traveling? That's the consensus on social media, at least. Savvy users dug up a 19th century photo of a girl who looks eerily similar to the 21st century teen. 120-year-old photo sparks theories that climate activist environmental heroine at Greta Thunberg is, in fact, a time travel who has traveled through time to save our planet. wishing her all the best and success in her mission to save the Earth. "We can use the help we can get," one person wrote. "It is safe to say that Greta Thunberg must have used a solar-powered time machine to time travel," joked another. A third user floated a much bleaker theory. The photo is from the dystopian future. Thunberg's doppelganger is one of 3 children in the photo from 1898. Per the University of Washington Library's digital archives, they're sifting for gold in the Canadian Yukon Territory. As if she would go anywhere near a mine. The trailblazing teen hasn't responded to the hubbub, as she's already set sail for Portugal on her zero-emissions yacht. But she did share this black-and-white photo before the time-traveling theories commenced. Maybe she saw it coming. Or maybe she's just got one of those timeless faces. 1940s beach photo is evidence time travel is real after man spotted with phone. The historic picture showed families relaxing on the sands in Cornwall in 1943, yet there is an apparent imposter on the crowded beach which social media users claimed was proof of time travel. A 1940s beach photo has claimed to prove that time travel is real. It shows hundreds of Brits getting away from World War II and enjoying a stretch on the beach, but an apparent sunbather, among the scores of others, seems to be from a different era. A brown-suited man, who is standing, can be seen looking at an object in his hand, which appears to be a modern-day smartphone far removed from the 1940s. Astronaut carved into the portico of Salamanca's cathedral, the Catedral Nueva, or New Cathedral, is not new at all, as is the way of many churches in European sites. It's a building project that started back in 1513, and was interrupted by various events, including the Lisbon earthquake of 1755. The reason Chris Hadfield would be agog to see the stonework in the portico around one of the entrances is that, along with the stone leaves and foliage, there is a carving of an astronaut. Appropriately, the astronaut is floating above the heads of those curious, baffled tourists who gather beneath it to wonder how ancient stonemasons foretold the coming of spacemen. The reason the little figure is there is because the carvings around the door needed replacement in recent years, and the stonemasons included it as a symbol of one of the most important things that had happened in history since the church was first built. Tauredman from a parallel universe. Throughout history, there have been occasional little mysteries that have centered around supposed time travelers claiming to be from parallel dimensions. One occurred in Ukraine back in 2006. Which saw a man claiming to be from years in the past turn up in Kiev without much in the way of explanation. Another centers around the man who tried to pass himself off as being from the non-existent country of Taured and hailing from a parallel universe. There are various stories that center on the man from Taured, with many claiming the urban legend to be fact. The story goes that back in July 1954 a Caucasian man with a beard arrived at Haneda Airport, also known as Tokyo International Airport. After security staff grew suspicious of his identity, the passport check showed that a country called Taured was listed as his nationality. Taured, of course, doesn't exist. However, the man stated it had been a nation for more than 1,000 years and pointed at Andorra on the map, claiming it was located there. Amid the confusion, the man was taken to a hotel and put in a room. 2 guards were placed outside the room until security staff were able to further investigate. Only, when the room was later opened, the man was missing. What was especially baffling was that the police established that he could not have escaped via his window as the room was too high up and there was no balcony. While many online believe the story to be gospel truth, the fact of the matter is that the truth behind the story is something much more mundane. From the abyss of time, as for the possession of time, science can already present us with 2 important elements. On the one hand, movement in time implies gigantic movements in space. If time is equivalent to space, this means that 1 second is equal to 300,000 kilometers, the distance that light travels in that time. It follows from this that a journey from 2000 to the 13th century would correspond to endless movement in space. Taking this into account, it can be assumed that in the very distant future, only certain civilizations will be able to afford such a huge energy expenditure that would be required to travel to the past. Consequently, such a journey will be undertaken only with a very specific purpose. History has also preserved information about other ways to travel through time. Die Glocke was a purported top-secret scientific technological device, wonder weapon, or Wunderwaffe developed in the 1940s in Nazi Germany. First described by Polish journalist and author Igor Witkowski in Product O Wunderwaffe, 2000, it was later popularized by military journalist and author Nick Cook, who associated it with Nazi occultism, anti-gravity, and free energy suppression research. Mainstream reviewers have criticized claims about Die Glocke as being pseudoscientific, recycled rumors, and a hoax. Die Glocke and other alleged Nazi miracle weapons have been dramatized in video games, television shows, and novels. In his 2001 book The Hunt for Zero Point, author Nick Cook identified claims about Die Glocke as having originated in the 2000 Polish book Product O Wunderwaffe, The Truth About the Wonder Weapon, by Igor Witkowski. Cook described Witkowski's claims of a device called the Bell engineered by Nazi scientists that was a glowing, rotating contraption rumored to have some kind of anti-gravitational effect, be a time machine, or part of an SS anti-gravity program for a flying saucer. According to Cook, Die Glocke was bell-shaped, about 4 meters, 12 feet, high and 3 meters, 9 feet, in diameter, and incorporated 2 high-speed, counter-rotating cylinders filled with a purplish, liquid metallic-looking substance that was supposed to be highly radioactive, codenamed Cerium-525. Cook recounts claims that scientists and technicians who worked on the Bell and who did not die of its effects were wiped out by the SS at the close of the war, and the device was moved to an unknown location. Cook proposed that SS official Hans Kammler later secretly traded this technology to the US military in exchange for his freedom. Witkowski suggested that a concrete ring called the Henge near the Wenceslas mine built in 1943 or 1944 and vaguely resembling Stonehenge was used to tether the Bell during tests. According to writer Jason Colavito, the structure is merely the remains of an ordinary industrial cooling tower. Witkowski's book was translated to English in 2003. He claimed to have discovered evidence of Die Glocke in a review of World War II-era documents that were declassified by the Polish government, which led him to additional research via archives and interviews. The first document, allegedly supplied to Witkowski by an unnamed Polish government official, was an affidavit from the war crimes trial for General Jacob Sporenberg, who supposedly confessed to ordering the murder of about 60 persons who had knowledge of the secretive project. Kurt Debus, Wernher von Braun and Walther Gerlach were also allegedly implicated in Die Glocke research. Witkowski claims Die Glocke was organized under a division of the Waffen-SS and operated mainly at facilities in Lower Silesia. Die Glocke was conceived in early 1942, and active experimentation began in mid-1944. Prisoners from the Gross-Rosen concentration camp were supposedly exposed to radiation from Die Glocke, resulting in many deaths and health problems. Survivors of the camp are alleged to have reported witnessing tests of Die Glocke, reporting a bright bluish light from the object. Witkowski postulated Cerium-525 was likely an irradiated form of mercury used in the creation of a form of plasma that was intended as a weapon and/or propulsion system, and which may have been capable of distorting space-time. The Chronovisor, the mysterious device known as the Chronovisor, has long captured the imagination of conspiracy theorists and enthusiasts of the unexplained. Claimed to be a time-viewing machine invented by Italian priest and scientist Father Pellegrino Ernetti in the 1960s, the Chronovisor supposedly allowed users to witness historical events as they unfolded. Ernetti asserted that the Chronovisor operated by detecting and decoding residual electromagnetic radiation left behind by past events. His claims about witnessing speeches of Cicero, the Last Supper, and even the crucifixion of Jesus Christ fueled speculation about the device's capabilities. The validity of the Chronovisor's existence, however, is shrouded in skepticism and controversy. Ernetti provided limited details about its construction, citing a team of scientists and Nobel laureates who collaborated on the project. Yet, no tangible evidence or blueprints have ever surfaced, leading many to question the authenticity of Ernetti's narrative. The Vatican, where Ernetti claimed the Chronovisor was developed, has remained tight-lipped about its existence. Church officials neither confirmed nor denied Ernetti's assertions, adding an additional layer of mystery to the story. Some argue that the Church might be safeguarding such a device due to the potential implications on historical and religious narratives. Philadelphia Experiment and Montauk Project. The Philadelphia Experiment is the name given to a naval military experiment which was supposedly carried out at the Philadelphia Naval Shipyard in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, USA, sometime around October 28, 1943. It is alleged that the U.S. Navy destroyer escort USS Eldridge was to be rendered invisible, or cloaked, to enemy devices. The experiment is also referred to as Project Rainbow. Some reports allege that the warship traveled back in time for about 10 seconds, however, popular culture has represented far bigger time jumps. The story is widely regarded as a hoax. The U.S. Navy maintains that no such experiment occurred, and details of the story contradict well-established facts about the Eldridge as well as the known laws of physics. The Montauk Project was alleged to be a series of secret United States government projects conducted at Camp Hero or Montauk Air Force Station on Montauk, Long Island, for the purpose of exotic research, including time travel. Jacques Vallée describes allegations of the Montauk Project as an outgrowth of stories about the Philadelphia Experiment.